I was 19 when it happened. My cousin Maya and I had planned a summer photography trip to Norway, chasing sunrise shots in the remote mountains. We'd been talking about it for months, saving up money and mapping out locations that looked incredible online. The plan was to camp overnight, near a lakeside clearing deep in a national forest. The place didn't have any cabins or marked trails. It was only a vast landscape, but Maya was really into landscape photography, and I wanted to get better at it. We hiked for about 3 hours to reach the spot. The clearing was beautiful, tucked between dense trees with the lake stretched out in front of us like glass. The sun was starting to sink lower, casting everything in that golden late afternoon light. As we started setting up camp, Maya pointed to something from a tree branch about 20 feet away. It was a torn jacket, covered in dried mud. Looked like it had been there for a while. I walked over to check it out. The fabric was stiff and weathered, like it had been through rain and sun multiple times. I figured some hiker had lost it, maybe weeks or months ago. Maya said we should leave it in case they come back looking for it. It made sense, so we did. We got the tent set up just as the sun started disappearing behind the mountains. The temperature dropped fast. Maya pulled out our camping stove, and we started cooking dinner by the fire we'd built. The instant noodles and canned soup tasted good after the hike. That's when we heard the long howl, echoing through the trees. Maya looked at me and said it was probably just a wolf, but something about the sound felt off. It didn't quite sound natural, like someone was trying to imitate an animal, but didn't get it right. I grabbed my flashlight and swept the beam along the tree line, but everything was as it should be. I had just moved the flashlight towards the other direction when I saw someone duck behind a thick pine tree fast, like they didn't want to be seen. My stomach dropped. Maya asked what I was looking for, and I told her I just saw something, maybe a deer. I didn't want to scare her. The trails were impossible to navigate in the dark, and we had no choice but to stay until sunrise. But I knew something was out there. We finished eating quickly. Maya talked about the shots she wanted to get in the morning, trying to keep the mood light. I nodded along, but kept glancing towards the trees, scanning for any movement. Around 10, we crawled into the tent. Maya fell asleep almost immediately. She could always sleep anywhere, even on hard ground in a sleeping bag. But I could only lie there, staring at the tent ceiling, listening to the wind, the trees creaking, and the occasional rustle of something small moving through the underbrush. Every noise made my heart race. I checked my phone. It was 2:45 in the morning. I needed to pee. It was still dark, but sunrise wasn't far off. I told myself the person was probably gone by now. Maybe they'd been a hiker passing through. I unzipped the tent as quietly as I could and slipped outside. The air was freezing, and my breath came out in thick clouds. I walked a short distance to a nearby tree, just far enough from the tent to have some privacy. I was midstream when I heard a soft crunch, like a branch breaking under weight. I froze. I tried telling myself it was probably a bird or maybe a squirrel. Animals moved around at night all the time. But then I heard it again, directly above me. I looked up, and there he was, sitting on a thick branch about 10 feet above my head. He was crouched low, trying to blend into the leaves, but his wide eyes were locked on me. I couldn't move. My brain couldn't process what I was seeing. We stayed like that for what felt like minutes, but was probably only seconds. Then something in me snapped and I bolted back to the tent, nearly tripping over a root. I yanked the zipper open, shook Maya awake, and whispered that we had to leave. She started to ask why, but I told her we didn't have time. I grabbed our bags, stuffed everything I could reach inside, and pulled her out of the tent. We ran. I kept my flashlight off, navigating by memory and moonlight. Maya stumbled behind me, asking what was happening, but I didn't answer. I just kept moving glancing back over my shoulder every few seconds to see if anyone was following. I didn't see him, but I felt him watching. We didn't stop until we reached the main trail, and then kept going until we found the parking lot where we'd left the car. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely get the key in the ignition. Maya finally asked what happened. I told her I'd seen someone, that he'd been sitting in a tree, watching us. She went pale and couldn't stop trembling until we reached the nearest town and checked into a cheap motel. I didn't sleep. Maya tried, but I could tell she was freaked out too. We left Norway the next day without getting a single sunrise shot. 3 months later, I was scrolling through the news and saw a headline that made my blood run cold. A group of college students had been found murdered in their sleep during a camping trip in the same area where Maya and I stayed. Only one of them survived. The article said the survivor told police they'd seen a man climbing down from a tree with a hatchet. He'd attacked them in the middle of the night, one by one, while they slept. Maya called me that same day. She'd seen it too. I never went back to that area. Maya gave up landscape photography after that, said she couldn't look at nature the same way anymore. Yet, I still wonder what ifs, and each scenario makes dread crawl up my neck. I was driving from a work conference in Salt Lake City when the storm hit. It was one of those violent summer thunderstorms that turns day into night and makes the highway feel like you're driving through a car wash. My Honda started sputtering around mile marker 43. The car coughed twice, then died completely. I coasted onto the shoulder and sat there watching sheets of rain hammer on the windshield. I could barely see 20 feet ahead, and of course, the phone had lost cell service. I squinted a little at the downpour, and I spotted a single light off to the right. Looked like it was maybe a quarter mile up the road. I had two options: sit in a dead car in a lightning storm, or make a run for it. I grabbed my jacket and bolted. By the time I reached the place, I was soaked through. It was an old roadside cottage with a stone foundation, wooden shutters, and a porch light that flickered every time thunder rolled overhead. I knocked hard on the door, hoping someone was actually home. The door opened slowly, and an old man peeked through the crack. He was thin as a rail, with hollow eyes that seemed to sink into his skull. He looked me up and down without saying anything for a moment. I told him my car had broken down, asked if I could use his phone. He nodded and stepped aside, letting me in. He introduced himself as Mr. Harrow, said he didn't get many visitors, especially not in weather like this. The inside of the cottage matched the outside, all dark wood and old furniture that creaked when you walked. The air smelled damp and floral, like old perfume that had been sitting out for too long. Mr. Harrow offered me a towel and some coffee. I thanked him and asked about the phone. He said the landline was down because of the storm, but I could stay the night if I wanted to. Apparently, he had a spare room upstairs. I didn't love the idea of spending the night in a stranger's house, but it was safer than sleeping in a dead car during a lightning storm. So I accepted. Mr. Harrow led me upstairs rather slowly, one hand on the railing the whole way. At the top, he opened a door to a small bedroom. Inside was a single bed, an old wooden dresser, and a window with thin curtains that fluttered even though the panes were closed. He stopped and turned to me. He said the room used to belong to his daughter. She got sick and spent the last of days in the same room. I didn't know what to say to that, so I just nodded. Then he added something that made my skin crawl. He told me to not move anything in the room, and that even a minor intrusion upsets her. I asked what he meant, but he just smiled weakly and left, closing the door behind him. The room had that smell of damp wood and old perfume from downstairs, but stronger. I sat on the edge of the bed, still in my wet clothes, trying to process what he'd just said. The whole situation felt off, but but I was exhausted and didn't have many options. That's when I noticed the portrait. It hung on the wall directly across from the bed. The woman was young, maybe 16 or 17, with pale skin and dark eyes that seemed to stare at me. The frame was ornate, probably antique. The painting itself looked old, the kind where the eyes follow you no matter where you move. I tried to ignore it as I lay down and closed my eyes, but every time I opened them, she was right there. After an hour of lying there wide awake, I couldn't take it anymore. There was a red scarf draped over a hook by the window. I grabbed it, walked over to the portrait, and covered her face completely. Finally, I could breathe. I climbed back into bed, and this time, exhaustion won. I fell asleep almost immediately. I don't know how long I was out. It could have been an hour, or it could have been 3. But something like a shift in the air woke me up. I opened my eyes. The room was dark, except for brief flashes of lightning that lit everything up in quick, harsh bursts. And in one of those flashes, I saw the figure standing in the corner of the room. She was tall, still, draped in shadow, and around her neck, she was wearing the red scarf. My heart stopped. I couldn't move. I just stared at the silhouette, waiting for another flash of lightning to prove I was seeing things. It came, and she was still there with her head tilted slightly to the side. I screamed. The door flew open. Mr. Harrow stumbled in, flipping on the light. He looked around the room frantic and asked what had happened. I pointed to the corner, but there was nothing there. He told me I must have been dreaming. Said people hallucinate when they're tired and stressed. But I knew what I saw. I didn't argue, just grabbed my jacket and told him I was leaving. He tried to convince me to stay, saying the storm was still bad. But I didn't care. I'd rather take my chances in the freezing car. I ran down those stairs and out the front door without looking back. Spent the rest of the night in my car, doors locked, eyes wide open. Every time I started to drift off, I'd jolt awake, convinced I'd seen her outside the window. When the sun finally came up, I got the car towed to the nearest town and caught a bus the rest of the way home. I never told anyone what happened. What would I even say? That I saw a ghost in the corner of the room wearing a scarf I'd used to cover her picture? People would call me insane. But I know what I saw. And I know I'll never drive that highway again. My brother Jack was 8, and I was 11 when it happened. We shared a bedroom upstairs. It had bunk beds. Mine was the top one, and Jack had the bottom. Our grandma had been staying with us for a few weeks. She'd been sick, and Mom and Dad wanted to keep an eye on her. She slept in the guest room down the hall from ours. That night, I'd gone to bed around 9. Jack always fell asleep before me. I was half awake when I felt someone shaking my shoulder. It was Jack. He was dangling on the ladder and looked wide awake and worried. I asked him what was wrong. He told me Grandma had been calling us for the last half hour. I rolled over, told him he was dreaming. Grandma was sick and was probably dead asleep, but Jack insisted he'd heard her voice, clear as anything, coming from downstairs. She wanted us to come down. I told him to go back to bed and close my eyes. But then I heard Grandma calling our names from somewhere downstairs. She wanted us to come down. She said she had toys for us and some surprises she'd picked up. I sat up in bed. Something about her voice felt wrong. It was too cheerful and sing-songy. Grandma wasn't like that, even when she was all healthy. Sickness had made her voice frailer. Jack looked at me, waiting for me to say something. I told him to stay in the room while I checked it out. I climbed down from the bunk and opened our bedroom door. The hallway was dark except for a nightlight near the bathroom. I could still hear the voice. "Come down, sweethearts. I have a surprise for you." It was clearer now. She kept saying our names and telling us to come down, that she had something special for us. I walked toward the stairs. My bare feet were cold on the hardwood floor. I was only 10 feet away from the staircase when the phone in my parents' room rang. Their door was open, and everything was dark inside. I ran down the hall and flipped on the light. The bed was empty and made, like they hadn't slept in it. My stomach dropped. The phone rang again. I grabbed it off the nightstand and answered. It was my mom. She sounded rushed and asked if Jack and I were okay. Said they'd tried calling earlier, but the line had been busy. I told her we were fine, asked where they were. She said they were at the hospital. Grandma had a sudden heart attack earlier that night, right after we'd gone to bed. They rushed her to the ER. They didn't tell us this because they didn't want to wake us up. She told me our uncle was on his way to stay with us for the night. Should be there any minute. She specifically asked us to lock our bedroom door and stay put until he arrives. I stood there holding the phone, my hands shaking. If Grandma was at the hospital, then who was calling us from downstairs? Mom asked if I was still there. I told her yes, but my voice cracked. She asked what was wrong. I didn't know how to explain it. I told her someone was downstairs who sounded like Grandma. They had been calling our names for the past half hour. There was silence on the other end. Then Mom told me to hang up, go back to our room, lock the door, and call 911. She said she and Dad were leaving the hospital right now. I hung up and ran back to our room. Jack was standing by the door, waiting. He asked what was happening. I told him to get in bed and that we needed to lock the door. His face went pale. He asked questions, but I ignored all of him and simply locked the door and grabbed my phone from the nightstand. That's when the voice came again, but this time it was right outside our door. She asked why we were being so difficult and told us to open the door, that she just wanted to see us. Jack climbed into my bunk with me. We pressed ourselves against the wall, as far from the door we could get. I called 911, told the dispatcher someone was in our house who was pretending to be our grandma, that our parents weren't home. She told me to stay on the line till the officers come. The voice kept talking, asking us to open the door, and that we were being bad boys for not coming down. Then the doorknob turned. We watched it twist slowly. They were testing the lock. Jack grabbed my arm so hard it hurt. I held the phone against my ear, telling the dispatcher that they were about to break in. The doorknob stopped moving. The voice went quiet. 5 minutes later, we heard sirens. Red and blue lights flashed through the window. The police arrived and searched the house. They found the back door open. Someone had just walked in. My parents got home 20 minutes later. Mom came straight to our room and held us both while Dad talked to the police downstairs. The next morning, we asked what had happened, who the woman was. Did the police find them? Mom said that it was probably just some thief. Jack asked how the woman knew our names if it was some random burglar. Mom didn't have an answer for that, so she changed the subject. Dad wouldn't talk about it at all. Just said it was over and we were safe now. We moved 6 months later. Mom said it was because Dad got a new job, but Jack thought it was because of that night. I agreed with him. I'm 28 now. Jack is 25. We still talk about it sometimes, usually late at night when we're visiting each other. He swears our parents knew who it was. I asked Mom about it again last year over dinner. She gave me the same answer she'd given when I was 11. I know she's lying. I wish I could know why. When I was 17, I worked a late shift at an ice cream shop in a small seaside town. The place was right on the boardwalk, one of those tourist spots that stayed busy during summer, but pretty much died after Labor Day. By October, most nights, I was the only one closing. My manager usually left around 9, and I'd handle the last hour alone. That particular night, the fog rolled in so thick you couldn't see more than 20 feet in one direction. The boardwalk lights created these weird halos in the mist, and everything felt muted and distant. I locked the front door around 10:30 and started my walk home. It usually took about 20 minutes, following the boardwalk down to the marina, then cutting through a few residential streets. The boardwalk was empty, except for one guy near the pier. He was tall, wore a dark hoodie with the hood up, and a baseball cap so low you couldn't see his face. He was packing up his gear, wrapping a fishing line around a reel. So I took him to be another fisherman and just walked past without thinking much about it. A few minutes later, I heard heavy footsteps behind me, matching my pace exactly. I glanced back. The fisherman was there, about 15 feet behind me, hands in his pockets. He left all his gear at the pier. That felt weird, but I told myself he was probably just heading in the same direction. In a small town, everyone walked the same streets. But then he started talking about random stuff, like if I were a local and lived nearby. His voice was calm, like he was trying very hard to sound casual. I answered in one word and kept walking, but he wouldn't shut up or move the other way. Instead, he started asking more questions, like if I always closed up the shop alone, if it were just me most nights. My stomach tightened. I gave him a vague answer about my manager staying late most nights. Honestly, I didn't want him to know I was usually by myself. He laughed softly and said that must be nice, having company. I nodded and picked up my pace a little. He chuckled and picked up his pace too. A couple of steps later, he said something that made my blood run cold. He said no one was home at my place when he passed by earlier, said the lights were all off. I froze mid-step. My heart pounded in my chest. How did he know which house was mine? I turned around to look at him, but the fog was thick. I could just make out his silhouette, standing there, watching me. I started walking faster, trying to get off the boardwalk into the streets where there might be other people. The footsteps behind me quickened too. I heard his breathing now. It was heavier and closer. I cut through a narrow alley between two buildings, thinking I could lose him. But he followed. I could hear his footsteps echoing off the brick walls. He was talking more freely now. He told me to tell my neighbor to lock her window. She said she was sleeping with it wide open when he checked. My mouth dried. I just wanted to get away from him, so I sprinted as fast as I could. My lungs burned from the cold air, and my shoes slapped against the wet pavement. I could hear him behind me, hear his laughter. He was chasing me. I turned down another street, then another, weaving through the neighborhood I'd grown up in. My house was only 3 blocks away. I reached the front door and fumbled with my keys. My hands were shaking so badly I almost dropped them. I finally got the door open, threw myself inside and slammed it shut. I locked the deadbolt, then the chain, as I just stood there, pressed against the door, trying to catch my breath. A couple of minutes later, I peeped outside to find his shadow on the frosted glass panel beside the door. He knocked slowly, whistled, and chuckled, but I didn't move. I grabbed my phone and called 911, told the dispatcher someone had followed me home and was outside my door right now. She told me to stay inside, keep the doors locked, and that the officers were on their way. I crept to the window and looked out through the curtain. The street was empty. The fog had gotten thicker. The police arrived within 10 minutes. 2 officers searched the neighborhood, checked behind houses, and looked indoors. They found nothing. One officer said he'd probably run when he heard the sirens. The other asked if I could describe him. I told him everything I'd remembered. They said they'd increase patrols in the area and told me to call immediately if I saw him again. After they left, I sat in my living room with all the lights on. I couldn't sleep. Every sound made me jump. Every shadow outside looked like someone standing there. Around 3 in the morning, I finally realized something that made everything worse. He hadn't followed me randomly. He knew which house was mine. He knew my neighbor's window was unlocked. He'd been watching me, maybe for days or weeks. He'd been watching the whole street. I told my parents everything the moment they returned from their shifts the next morning. My dad installed new locks and a security camera that same day. My mom drove me to and from school and work for the next 2 months until I finally got my license. I quit the ice cream shop a few weeks later. I couldn't handle closing anymore. I never saw that man again. Police never found him. They said he'd probably moved on, that people like that don't usually stick around once they've been reported. But sometimes, late at night, I still think about him standing outside my door. The way he tapped on the glass, slow and patient, like he had all the time in the world. And I wonder if he's still out there, watching someone else.